What would you do if someone asked you to make an entire factory disappear? Not with explosives or demolition, but with paint, canvas, and chicken wire. I'm about to tell you a story that still feels like a fever dream, even after all these years. A story about the time I helped build a fake city on top of one of America's most important war factories. My name doesn't matter much now. What matters is what we did in 1942 and how a crew of Hollywood dreamers turned Boeing Plant 2 in Seattle into the most elaborate illusion of World War II. I remember the day I got the call. It was March 1942, 4 months after Pearl Harbor. I'd been working as a set designer at Warner Brothers, building fake storefronts and saloon interiors for cowboy pictures. The war had already pulled half our crew into uniform. I figured my draft notice would arrive any day. Instead, I got a telegram from the Army Corps of Engineers. Report to Seattle immediately. Bring your tools, tell no one. The train ride north took 3 days. I spent most of it wondering what the Army wanted with a movie set builder. Build barracks, paint camouflage on tanks. I had no idea I was about to work on something that would protect 30,000 lives and help win the war. I arrived in Seattle on a gray Tuesday morning. The city was transformed. Soldiers everywhere, blackout curtains in every window, anti-aircraft guns positioned on hilltops. The fear was real. Everyone expected Japanese bombers to appear over the coast any day. The attack on Pearl Harbor had happened just 4 months earlier. If they could strike Hawaii, why not Seattle? A military truck picked me up at the train station. The driver wouldn't tell me where we were going. We drove south through industrial areas, past shipyards and warehouses, until we reached a massive rectangular building that seemed to stretch forever. Boeing Plant 2. Even from the ground, I could see it was enormous. The driver pulled up to a guarded gate and handed my papers to an MP. Inside, I met John Stewart Detley for the first time. He'd been my boss at Warner Brothers years earlier before he moved to MGM. Detley was a genius at creating illusions. He could make a soundstage in Burbank look like ancient Rome or the streets of Paris. Now the army had given him an impossible task, and he'd assembled a team of 40 set designers, painters, and carpenters to pull it off. Detley took me up to the roof of Plant 2 that first day. I'll never forget the moment I stepped out onto that vast expanse of flat industrial roofing. 26 acres of nothing but tar paper and skylights, stretching in every direction. 3 stories below us, workers were assembling B-17 bombers. Above us, nothing but sky. And somewhere out in the Pacific, Japanese aircraft carriers that might be heading our way. Detley spread an aerial photograph on a makeshift table. The photo showed Plant 2 from 3,000 feet up. The factory looked like exactly what it was, a giant rectangular target sitting 3 miles from Puget Sound. Then he showed me architectural drawings, hundreds of them. Plans for houses, streets, trees, gardens, cars. An entire neighborhood designed to be built on top of this roof. I remember thinking he'd lost his mind. Build houses on a factory roof. How would they support the weight? How would we make them look real from the air? How would the factory continue operating underneath? Detley must have seen the doubt in my face because he smiled and said something I'll never forget. In Hollywood, we make the impossible look real for 90 minutes. Here, we're going to make the impossible look real for however long this war lasts. The work began in May 1942. We started with structural surveys. Engineers calculated exactly how much weight the roof could support. The answer wasn't encouraging. The roof could handle about 5 pounds per square foot beyond its existing load. That meant everything we built had to be extraordinarily light. No real lumber for house frames, no actual shingles or siding. Everything had to be an illusion. I spent the first 2 weeks building test structures. We tried different materials and construction techniques. Regular canvas was too heavy and didn't hold paint well. Burlap worked better but tore easily in wind. We finally settled on a fire-treated burlap stretched over chicken wire frames with wooden supports at stress points. I built a prototype house, just one wall, really, and we hoisted it onto the roof for testing. From ground level, it looked ridiculous. A flimsy wall of burlap and wire that swayed in the breeze. But when the Army sent a reconnaissance plane over at 3,000 feet, the pilot radioed back that he could see a house under construction. The illusion worked. From altitude, the details disappeared. What remained looked real enough. By June, all 40 of us were working 7 days a week. We built houses in sections on the ground, then hoisted them onto the roof with cranes and assembled them like puzzle pieces. Each house was different, deadly insisted on variety. Real neighborhoods aren't uniform. Some houses were large, two-story structures. Others were small bungalows. We painted each one differently. White clapboard, gray shingles, red brick, yellow stucco. We added shutters, chimneys, porches. Every detail mattered. I specialized in trees. Strange thing to say, but it's true. I became the tree expert. Real trees were impossible, obviously. We needed something that looked like trees from the air but weighed almost nothing. I experimented for weeks. Paper trees tore in rain. Cloth trees looked flat. Finally, I developed a design using chicken wire shaped into tree forms, covered with burlap strips, dyed various shades of green and brown, then decorated with actual chicken feathers dyed to match. The feathers were my idea. I'd noticed that real trees have texture, thousands of individual leaves catching light differently. The dyed feathers created that same effect. From 3,000 feet up, our chicken wire and feather trees cast shadows just like real vegetation. We built 470 trees in 6 different sizes. My hands were stained green for months from dye. The streets were someone else's specialty, but I helped with installation. We painted them on canvas sheets stretched across wooden frames. The paint was mixed with sawdust to create texture. We painted cracks, oil stains, patches where repairs had been made. Real streets aren't perfect, neither were ours. We deliberately made them imperfect in realistic ways. I remember one day in July we were installing a section of street near the factory's eastern edge. A genuine neighborhood sat just beyond the property line. I could see real houses, real streets, real trees. Then I'd look back at our fake neighborhood taking shape on the roof. The similarity was unsettling. We were creating a ghost neighborhood, populated by nobody, where nothing real would ever happen. The gardens were perhaps the most tedious work. Some crew members spent entire days arranging colored gravel into rows that resembled vegetable patches. Others painted flower beds directly onto canvas yards. We installed green burlap lawns that had to be stretched perfectly taut or they'd sag and look wrong from above. I helped install clotheslines behind several houses. We hung actual laundry, old shirts and sheets from thrift stores, and changed them out every few weeks to maintain the illusion that people lived there. By August, the neighborhood was taking shape. Walking across the roof felt like wandering through a surreal dream. Houses surrounded me on all sides. but they swayed slightly in the wind. Streets stretched in neat lines, but they gave slightly under my weight. Trees stood in yards, but they rattled when the breeze picked up. Everything was almost right, but fundamentally wrong. The army assigned military police to patrol the roof once we'd completed enough of the installation to require guarding. These MPs wore civilian clothes, slacks, shirts, sometimes hats. If enemy reconnaissance aircraft appeared, they were supposed to casually stroll the fake streets, sit on fake porches, make everything look occupied and normal. I trained several of them on the fragility of our structures. Don't lean against the houses, I'd say. Don't kick the trees. Step carefully on the streets. Everything looks solid, but it's mostly air and prayer. One young MP asked me what would happen if Japanese bombers actually showed up. Would our fake neighborhood fool them? I told him the truth. I had no idea. We were building the illusion for reconnaissance cameras, not for pilots actively seeking targets. If bombers arrived, they'd probably ignore the fake neighborhood and hit the shipyards or the actual residential areas anyway. Our job was to erase Plan 2 from Japanese intelligence maps before they even planned their attack routes. The technical challenges never stopped. Ventilation was a constant problem. The factory below needed to exhaust hot air from welding operations and machinery. We couldn't just let it vent through obvious openings. I helped design fake shrubs positioned over exhaust vents. Hot air rose through the wire and burlap, dispersing before it became visible. From above, they looked like ordinary bushes. Skylights were another challenge. The factory needed natural light, but skylights are obvious from the air. Bright rectangular reflections that scream industrial building. We solved this by painting the skylights with mottled patterns that broke up the reflection while still allowing light through. Some skylights were disguised as yards with painted grass. Others became sections of street. The paint reduced light transmission by about 30%, but the factory could compensate with additional electric lighting. I remember the first major test in September 1942. The Army sent B-17s from McCord Field to photograph Plant 2 from various altitudes. We all stood in a parking lot nearby, watching the bombers circle overhead. They made passes at 3,000 feet, 5,000 feet, 8,000 feet. Each time, cameras clicked away, capturing images that would determine whether months of work had succeeded or failed. The photographs came back 2 days later. Deadly gathered all of us in a warehouse to see them. He pinned the images to a wall and stepped back. I stared at those photographs for a long time. Plant 2 had vanished. In its place sat an ordinary suburban neighborhood, indistinguishable from the genuine residential area surrounding it. Streets lined with houses, trees in yards, cars in driveways. We'd built those cars from wooden frames and painted canvas, shaped like 1930s sedans and coupes. From the air, they looked real enough. One detail I'll never forget. In one photograph, you could see actual people on genuine streets in the real neighborhood next door. And you could see our MPs walking our fake streets on the roof. From that altitude, both looked equally real. The illusion was complete. But creating the neighborhood was only half the battle. Maintaining it became my job for the next 3 years. Deadly returned to Hollywood after the initial installation. Most of the construction crew left. I stayed, along with about a dozen others, to keep the illusion alive. Seattle's weather was brutal on our materials. Rain was the worst enemy. Water soaked the burlap, causing colors to run and fade. Wind tore sections of fake roofing and knocked down trees. Every few weeks, we'd find damage that needed repair. I'd climb onto the roof with paint, canvas, wire, and glue, fixing houses that had never sheltered anyone, repairing streets that had never known traffic. I repainted an entire house once after a winter storm tore the burlap siding completely off one wall. I spent 3 days rebuilding trees that had blown over. I patched countless sections of street where the canvas had torn or the paint had worn away. The work was tedious but essential. Even small breaks in the illusion could tip off enemy analysts studying aerial photographs. The strangest part was the isolation. I'd spend hours alone on that roof, surrounded by fake houses in a fake neighborhood, maintaining an illusion for an enemy that might never come. Sometimes I'd sit on a fake porch and eat lunch, looking out over fake streets toward genuine houses just beyond the property line. The contrast was jarring. Real life happened over there. Over here, I maintained a ghost town designed to protect the real work happening 3 stories below. Inside the factory, life went on. 30,000 workers entered every day through normal ground level doors, took elevators to their stations, and assembled B-17 bombers. 16 aircraft rolled off the assembly line daily. That's one complete bomber every 90 minutes. The production numbers were staggering. Each B-17 required 15,000 separate parts. Workers installed 4 engines, 11 machine guns, thousands of rivets, miles of electrical wiring. And through it all, my fake neighborhood sat overhead, hiding their work from eyes that might be watching from across the Pacific. I met some of the workers during my maintenance rounds. Many of them would climb access ladders to the roof during breaks, curious about the strange world we'd built above their heads. They'd walk the fake streets, touch the fake houses, marvel at the fake trees. Some found it reassuring. The elaborate camouflage proved the government was serious about protecting them. Others found it unsettling, like working inside a lie. One woman told me she thought about the fake neighborhood every time air raid sirens went off. Seattle ran regular drills throughout the war. When sirens sounded, everyone would rush to shelters or blackout positions. She'd crouch in the darkness and think about my fake houses and fake trees overhead, wondering if they'd actually fool Japanese bombardiers, or if the elaborate illusion would just make the factory easier to spot as something worth hiding. I wondered the same thing. We never found out. Japanese reconnaissance aircraft occasionally approached the west coast, but none penetrated as far as Seattle. The few commercial aerial photographs that Japanese intelligence obtained showed Plant 2 as it appeared before the camouflage installation. After we finished, updated photographs apparently never reached enemy analysts. American code breakers later confirmed that Japanese military planners had identified several Boeing facilities as potential targets, but Plant 2 wasn't among them. Our fake neighborhood had erased it from their maps. The years blurred together. 1943 became 1944. I repainted houses, replaced trees, patched streets. The MPs guarding the roof became familiar. We'd share coffee and cigarettes during their patrols. Some had been there almost as long as I had. We'd joke about our fake neighborhood, give streets unofficial names, assign made-up residents to particular houses. "Old Mrs. Henderson lives there," one MP would say, pointing to a fake bungalow. "Never mows her lawn, drives the neighborhood association crazy." Gallows humor, maybe, but it helped maintain morale through the tedious work of sustaining an illusion that might never be tested. Below us, the B-17s kept rolling out. I'd sometimes watch at night when security was lighter. The process was remarkable. A section of fake neighborhood would roll aside on tracks. One of the engineering marvels Deadly had designed into the system, and a completed bomber would emerge, towed by tractor to a parking area. Then the fake neighborhood would roll back into place and the factory would disappear again. Those bombers flew to Europe and bombed Germany into submission. I'd read about it in newspapers. Raids over Berlin, Dresden, Hamburg. Hundreds of B-17s dropping thousands of tons of bombs on Nazi factories, oil refineries, rail yards. Some of those bombers came from Plant 2. Some of them flew over targets while being protected by the fake neighborhood I maintain every day. The connection felt tenuous but real. I was building fake houses in Seattle. Because I was building fake houses, the factory stayed hidden. Because the factory stayed hidden, it kept producing bombers. Because it kept producing bombers, the war was ending sooner. Cause and effect stretched across thousands of miles and millions of lives. And somewhere in that chain, my work with paint and canvas and chicken wire mattered. August 1945 brought the end. Japan surrendered after the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The war was over. I remember standing on the roof that day, surrounded by fake houses that had served their purpose. We'd maintained the illusion for 3 years and 4 months. The fake neighborhood had protected 30,000 workers and enabled the production of more than 6,000 B-17 bombers. And now it was useless. Dismantling began immediately. The army wanted the camouflage removed quickly. We had 3 months to erase everything we'd built. I helped tear down the fake neighborhood, section by section. Houses came apart easily, just burlap and wire and wood. Streets rolled up like carpets. Trees collapsed into piles of chicken wire and feathers. It felt strange destroying something I'd worked so hard to maintain. Each fake house I dismantled represented hours of construction, painting, maintenance. Each fake tree held memories of storms weathered and repairs made. We weren't just removing camouflage. We were erasing a ghost town that had existed solely in the eyes of potential enemies who never came. Most materials were discarded. Some pieces went to museums. I kept one fake tree as a souvenir. It sat in my garage for years, a ridiculous sculpture of chicken wire and dyed feathers that once helped hide a factory from Japanese intelligence analysts. Eventually, I donated it to a historical society. I hope someone preserved it. After the war, I returned to Hollywood. Deadly had already died by then. Most of the crew scattered. We'd been brought together for one impossible task, completed it successfully, then went our separate ways. I worked on movie sets for another 20 years, building fake saloons and fake castles and fake spaceships. None of it felt as important as the fake neighborhood in Seattle. I'm old now. Most people involved in Plant 2's camouflage are gone. The factory still stands, though modified and expanded beyond recognition. No trace remains of the fake neighborhood, but I remember it vividly. I remember painting houses that would never shelter families. I remember building trees that would never provide shade. I remember maintaining streets that would never know traffic. I remember walking among fake houses on a real roof, maintaining an illusion designed to protect real people doing real work. And I remember that for 3 years and 4 months, we succeeded. Not a single bomb fell on Plant 2. Not a single worker died from enemy action. The 30,000 people who assembled bombers beneath my fake neighborhood went home to real neighborhoods every night, alive because we'd made their factory disappear. That's the story. That's what we did. A crew of Hollywood dreamers built a fake city to hide a real factory and helped win a war by making something vitally important look completely ordinary. If this story moved you the way living it moved me, hit that like button. Help share this forgotten piece of history with people who care about the ingenuity and determination that won World War II. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story. We're bringing these memories out of archives and fading recollections, preserving them for people who weren't there but need to understand what was done and why it mattered. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if someone in your family worked in defense production during the war. Tell us if this story sparked memories or questions. You're not just viewers. You're part of keeping these memories alive for the people who come after us. Thank you for listening to an old set designer's memories. Thank you for caring about fake houses and fake trees and the real people they protected. Thank you for remembering that sometimes the most important work is making something disappear so others can build what's needed to win.